Help for higher education expenses. Tax credits, deductions, and savings plans can help taxpayers with their expenses for higher education. A tax credit reduces the amount of income tax you may have to pay. A deduction reduces the amount of your income that is subject to tax, thus generally reducing the amount of tax you may have to pay. Certain savings plans allow the accumulated earnings to grow tax-free until money is taken out, which is known as a distribution, or allow the distribution to be tax-free, or both. An exclusion from income means that you won't have to pay income tax on the benefit you're receiving, but you also won't be able to use that same tax-free benefit for a deduction or a credit. An education credit helps with the cost of higher education by reducing the amount of tax owed on your tax return. If the credit reduces your tax to less than zero, you may get a refund. There are two education credits available: the American Opportunity Tax Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit. There are additional rules for each credit, but you must meet all three of the following for either credit. You or your dependent or a third party pays qualified education expenses for higher education. Number 2, an eligible student must be enrolled at an eligible educational institution. Number 3, the eligible student is yourself, your spouse, or a dependent you list on your tax return. If you're eligible to claim the Lifetime Learning Credit and are also eligible to claim the American Opportunity Credit for the same student in the same year, you can choose to claim either credit but not both. Education deduction. The tuition and fees deduction is not available for tax years after 2017. Qualified student loans. This is a loan you took out solely to pay qualified education expenses that were for you, your spouse, or a person who was your dependent when you took out the loan, paid or incurred within a reasonable period of time before or after you took out the loan, for education provided during an academic period for an eligible student. Loans from the following sources are not qualified student loans: a related person or a qualified employer plan. Qualified education expenses. These includes amounts paid for the following items: tuition and fees, books, supplies, and equipment. Savings plans. States may establish and maintain programs that allow you to either prepay or contribute to an account for paying a student's qualified education expenses at a post-secondary institution. Eligible educational institutions may establish and maintain programs that allow you to prepay a student's qualified education expenses. In 2019, contributions made by any Wisconsin adult reduce their state taxable income dollar for dollar up to $3,280 per beneficiary per year. The contribution may be made to an existing account you own, another Wisconsin account, or to a new one. Contributions in excess of $3,280 may be carried forward to be applied in subsequent tax years. EdVest and Tomorrow's Scholar are the two savings plans in Wisconsin's 529 College Savings Program. Tax treatment of scholarships and grants. A scholarship is generally an amount paid or allowed to for the benefit of a student at an educational institution to aid in the pursuit of studies. The student may be either an undergrad or a graduate. A fellowship is generally an amount paid for the benefit of an individual to aid in the pursuit of study or research. Generally, when the amount is tax-free or taxable, depends on the expense paid with the amount and whether you are a degree candidate. A scholarship or fellowship is tax-free only if you meet the following conditions. You are a candidate for a degree at an eligible educational institution, or you use the scholarship or fellowship to pay qualified education expenses. For purpose of tax-free scholarships and fellowships, these expenses are tuition and fees required to enroll at or attend an eligible educational institution, course-related expenses such as fees, books, supplies, and equipment that's required for the courses at the eligible educational institution. These items must be required of all students in your course of instruction. In order for these to be qualified education expenses, the terms of the scholarship or fellowship can't require that it be used for other purposes, such as room and board, or specify that it can't be used for tuition or course-related expenses. Qualified education expenses do not cover the cost of room and board, travel, research, and clerical help. Equipment and other expenses that are not required for enrollment in or attendance at an eligible educational institution. Pell Grants. Receiving a Pell Grant as part of your federal student aid award can minimize or even eliminate the financial burden of paying the tuition to enroll in school. The IRS treats a Pell Grant as a scholarship, which means it's possible that you'll have to report the grant money on your tax return and maybe even pay income tax on the money. Tax-free Pell Grants. A Pell Grant does not need to be reported on your tax return if you satisfy two IRS requirements that apply to all scholarships and grants. You must be enrolled in a program as a degree candidate, or you must be pursuing a training program that prepares you for specific types of employment upon completion. You must use the Pell Grant only to pay for qualified educational expenses. If you don't use all of your Pell Grant money for qualified educational expenses, you need to determine how much of the grant to report on your tax return. Regardless of the tax form you use, you need to report the amount not used on the wages and salary line and enter school, SCH as an abbreviation, to the left of that amount. Just because you report the Pell Grant as taxable income doesn't necessarily mean you will pay tax on it. This depends on other factors such as the amount of other income you report, your filing status, and the deductions and credits you're eligible for. This is a copy of the tuition statement. Once you receive this in the mail, you will bring this with you to your tax site in order for us to prepare your taxes. You will see box number one is payments received for qualified tuition and related expenses. Box number 5, as an example, is where you will find the scholarships or grants. When you come to the tax site, or when the taxpayer comes to the tax site, we need this 1098-T, and we also need a copy of the student's account statement, and that has to include all of the expenses paid during the calendar year that may qualify. And that the exception on that would be spring tuition that you paid in December of 2019.